Today on Ag News Daily.
The U.S. farmer is learning that we have to treat them as such. They're living organisms. Maybe stewarding them is a little bit different than a jug of chemical, right? You know, it has to live on seed, live in the soil to do the things.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. I feel like it's been a long time since I've been on one.
It has, because last week you forgot to show up. And don't worry, I took advantage of that and made sure everybody...
I knew you did. Yes, spring is in the air.
It is.
And it's in the brain. And a lot of us are getting excited to put crops in the ground. We do see a little weather update here. Some scattered showers were across the Midwest this week. We did see some warming temperatures that are heading into the weekend. We're likely to see another round of major storm systems hit the area. The system could bring widespread showers, thunderstorms, and even northern snow. This active weather pattern will continue into next week, potentially leading to an excessive amount of rainfall, delaying the early field work. However, moisture may offer some relief to drought-stricken areas. In the Great Lakes region, nearly stationary front is maintaining chilly conditions for folks there, while milder weather prevails further southwest. In the 6 to 10 day forecast, the outlook calls for cooler than normal temperatures across much of the north, the far west, and then we see warmer than normal conditions in the south and in the east. Most regions are likely to see above average precipitation, except for the southern plains where drier weather is expected. Here in Iowa, lots of anhydrous going on, lots of folks taking advantage of those drier conditions and some of that warm weather. But while that warmth was welcomed in some of these areas, it also brings increased wildfire risk. Here in Iowa, we've got high winds today, and that wildfire risk is high. In the Central Plains, meanwhile, a persistent upper-level trough will continue in the northeast to keep that area cool with, like we said, some occasional snow. And I'm fine if I don't see snow again.
I am as well.
2026.
I am as well. It's been a nice little warm-up here for the past few days. Well, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary has named new leaders to oversee key risk management programs, including one Iowa farmer. Iowa farmer Pat Swanson, a crop insurance agency owner and former American Soybean Association director, will serve as the administration's new risk management agency administrator. A Pennsylvania farmer, Bill Beam, has been appointed administrator of the Farm Service Agency, and California's Audrey Betancourt will lead the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Both previously held roles in the Trump administration. Tanner, I know we've seen some FSA offices shutting down with lack of guidance, so it'll be good to see that key administration get in office. And additionally, Brooke Appleton of Missouri will serve as the Deputy Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, while Andrew Fisher will serve as Chief of Staff for the department. And Colton Buckley of Texas will serve as Chief of Staff of the NRCS. Now, these roles are not subject to U.S. Senate confirmation hearings, so these folks will hopefully step into office fairly quickly.
And that's good. And there are familiar names, like you said, to agriculture as far as that goes. A lot of clarity hopefully to come. We do see here, as the USDA discusses funding, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced that there is the release of that previously obligated funds under the Rural Energy for America program, empowering rural America and powering affordable clean energy programs. Recipients of those funds will have 30 days to review and voluntarily revise their projected plans to align with the Unleashing American Energy Executive Order. The move allows rural electric providers and small businesses to shift their focuses towards expanding American energy production while removing diversity, equity, and climate-related mandates from their previous proposals. So an update there for those respondents. Within those 30 days, participants will respond to several questions and submit a brief narrative outlining any of their changes. The updated guidance marks to shift away from the policies tied to the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act. Instead, it puts emphasis on investments that will support our rural communities. So very clear direction there. A very short window to make a response for those, but it definitely provides more clarity.
Well, we also got clarity this week on the Trump administration's path forward with biofuel policies, as President Trump and the administration are urging big oil companies and biofuel companies, as well as farm groups, to find common ground And hoping to avoid clashes on the political side, he is encouraging them to do this together, according to Reuters. So far, 2 meetings have taken place with industry stakeholders, with discussions centered on increasing biomass-based diesel volumes. Topics at one of the recent meetings included the future of biofuel blending mandates, small refinery exemptions, and biofuel tax policies. Additionally, the EPA is preparing the new renewable fuel standard blending requirements that will set those volume obligations for the next 2 to 3 years, as well as overseeing the program's multi-billion-dollar compliance credit market. Tanner, this is pretty unique. I think that he is pushing these groups to sit down and kind of sort it out for themselves. During President Trump's first term, the EPA approved a record number of these small refinery exemption waivers by allowing quote-unquote small refiners to bypass blending mandates. That decision, of course, sparked backlash from many Farm Belt Republicans who argued it harmed farmers and, of course, biofuel industries as well. Former President Biden later attempted to eliminate those exemptions, leading to some legal challenges that reached the Supreme Court, and several exemption requests remain under current EPA review. Another focal point of that group is going to be the future of the 45Z tax credit for biomass-based diesel, introduced, of course, under the Biden administration. Now, unlike the previous flat $1 per gallon blender's credit, 45Z, of course, rewards producers based on carbon intensity scores. It's something we've talked a lot about here on this podcast. And President Trump and Republicans have yet to indicate whether they would continue that 45Z program altogether, putting a lot of uncertainty around the future of some of those tax credits.
I'm glad that was your story, because all I could think about is the Iowa corn growers commercial of when they're dancing by the pump. When they
pump it up, that's right.
That's right. Well, we'll get into some data from the USDA. As of March 1st, there were 74.5 million hogs and pigs in the United States. That number was down slightly, 1% lower than March of 2024. Or lower than December 1st of 2024 as well. The USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, their quarterly hogs and pig report, was released yesterday. Lee Schultz, the chief economist with Ever.ag, told the National Hog Farmer that the numbers fell below pre-report expectations and came in lower than what analysts predicted, with most figures below last year's levels. U.S. hog producers plan to have 2.915 million sows farrowed during the months of March to May in that quarter. That's a slight decline from last year, just 1% again. June to August, intentions are also down 1% from 2024, but down 2% from 2023. So a shift there in the hog market, Delaney.
Yeah, I think we're going to touch on the cattle on feed report as well. So continuing to see consolidation in the livestock markets. In some other policy news here this week, President Trump has signed an executive order to boost domestic production of critical minerals, including potash. The order directs federal agencies to fast-track reviews of pending mineral projects and prioritize production on federal lands. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum will lead the effort through the National Energy Dominance Council, with the authority to expand the list of covered minerals. A White House official told CNBC this week that President Trump plans to use the Defense Production Act to accelerate mineral output, a move also taken during the Biden administration back in 2022. The U.S. International Development Finance Corporation will fund projects in partnership with the Defense Department. With the U.S. importing more than 91% of our potash back in 2023, the administration says this is a clear priority, along with creating jobs, boosting the rural economy, and ensuring a steady supply of fertilizers to keep U.S. farmers competitive. So certainly an interesting move there. Not unprecedented, as we mentioned, that it has been done in the past, but nonetheless, definitely a priority.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly. We do see lots of agricultural groups getting together to urge the Trump administration to grant exemptions on bulk shipments as it considers the new fees on Chinese vessels. Seems to be a hot topic, especially when it is broken down to cents per bushel and a lot of these discussions happen. One of those is the National Corn Growers Association, and the other is the Renewable Fuel Association, amongst more, requesting relief. In a letter to the U.S. Trade Representative's office, the RFA also called for exemptions from sourcing requirements for U.S.-built and flagged vessels until domestic ship production can meet the demands. The RFA president, Jeff Cooper, emphasized that efficient and reliable export transportation is essential for the competitiveness of the U.S. ag in the global market. That's one thing economists say is our advantage over South America, is that reliability at our ports.
Well, as I mentioned, we have more livestock news this week with the latest U.S. cattle on feed report that showed the nation's beef herd is down 2% once again from last year. Now, this is coming after, I think we hit was it 40 or 60 year herd shortage last year. As of March 1st, feedlots with a capacity of 1,000 or more head held 11.6 million cattle, and February placements were down 1.5 million head total, which is down about 18% from 2024, with net placements at 1.49 million. Fed cattle marketings were also down 9% from last year, totaling just over 1.6 million head. Meanwhile, other disappearances rose 7% to 60,000 head. A DTN analyst called the report bullish, indicating potential support for cattle prices. And I was just talking about this with some growers earlier this week, Tanner. They're like, is now a good time to get into the cattle market? Well, I think we continue to see a shrinking herd and really strong demand.
Yeah, we'll see what the meat market has to say. But that category of other disappearances is interesting. Mm-hmm. Here's some good news, though. In the industry, meat sales reached record $104.6 billion in 2024, with pounds sold up 2.3% from the previous year. On average, consumers are purchasing meat more than once a week, keeping it the largest fresh department in grocery stores. According to the 20th annual Power of Meat report, 98% of American households buy meat and 73% see it as a healthy choice. Protein remains a priority, with eggs, chicken, and beef ranking as top sources. Rick Stein, Vice President of Fresh Foods for the Food Industry Association, says shoppers now prioritize value beyond price, considering quality, relevance, convenience, and experience, with meat featured in 90% of home-cooked dinners. That's good news.
That seems like a really big win.
I feel like that's almost more bullish than the report of the cattle on feed.
I would agree. And it's interesting because, we're starting to see kind of quote-unquote a recession globally, but we're still seeing really strong demand. Well, at this year's Commodity Classic, we had another great conversation with Adam Kayser, Global Product Technical Manager with Novonesis.
That's a new job.
While the biologicals market has grown significantly, Novonesis remains focused on helping farmers harness nature's problem solvers, enzymes, and microbes. Let's dive into that interview.
Well, we're so excited. It's interesting, Tanner, that this time last year we were sitting down with Adam as well. We're chatting with Adam Kayser of Novonesis. New title. Adam is now the Global Product Technical Manager. But Adam, we're so excited to catch up with you again. It's weird that we only see sometimes people, once a year at the show, but nonetheless, we're excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
So Adam, before we get into some of the bulk we want to talk to you about with biologicals, let's do a 10,000-foot overview of who is Novonesis for those of our listeners who may not have caught last year's episode.
Sure. I'll begin with the company globally, right? And of course, I represent the division that works with farmers with bioyield technologies. We also have a division that works with biocontrol type products. We keep them a little bit separate just because of regulatory timelines and whatnot. It just makes us easier for business for us. But outside of that, in agriculture, we deal with feed enzymes and probiotics. That would be really new to the organization with Novonesis, with our recent merger acquisition of Cushion Hansen a year ago. And that's why the name has obviously changed. Outside of that, anything industrial enzymes that are used in, whether it's washing your clothes, using enzymes to utilize cold water to get them just as clean as warmer water, or what farmers are also interested in is bioenergy, right? And the conversion of corn products to alcohol that we can supplement our gas supply and oxygenate and burn cleaner fuel. That's also made possible due to enzymatic activity, yeast and other microbes in the fermentation process of alcohol and production of alcohol.
It's all coming back to me.
I've always wondered how you can wash things with cold water, and they always told you as a kid that you had to have hot water when you washed your hands, and now you can wash your clothes cold.
For clothes, yes. I think for
I know, I snuck
washing
that in there.
hands, let's keep hot though.
Got to put some enzymes in my soap. My soap dispenser.
There probably is already in there.
That's great. Well, yeah, so I appreciate that, kind of getting our listeners caught back up. Now explain what your new role does.
So it's actually really similar. So during the transition to our new company, Novonesis, we do have a global reach, right? And as the U.S. technical agronomist, I was often consulted by other regions throughout the world because a lot of our products and technologies really start here. This is where our R&D efforts are consolidated. This is where we do all of our contract research work in the U.S. and Canada. And then we take the products that we're successful with and utilizing in the field, and other regions of the world want to bring them aboard. And my colleagues in those areas want to know how to use them, how to treat them, how to dose, a lot of the maybe geeky things that not everybody wants to hear and understand. But that's what I was doing a little bit before, and now that's a larger percentage of my job.
I'm going to be really interested, as you're kind of getting into this new role, you're going to be doing some more global travel. I'm going to be really interested, we were talking about this a little before we started recording, but what are other countries' perceptions of using biologicals? I think sometimes we have maybe mixed reviews here in the U.S. There's a lot of biologicals in the space. Maybe some that weren't traditionally labeled as biologicals are now kind of getting lumped into that group. So I think it's going to be really interesting to maybe have another conversation with you in 6 months, maybe next year at the show, after you've had some of that different perspective to bring that to us.
What I could tell you so far is it's very similar. Obviously, the world is paying attention, not just the U.S. The world is paying attention to these technologies, and where I maybe take a little bit of a left turn would be the fact that sometimes I call us a legume inoculant company before biological. And why? Because that really goes back to our roots. The first patented legume inoculant 130 years ago, manufactured in the United States. So that's our bread and butter. It's not as maybe as attractive as the biological space is today. But that's where we have our roots. And then, of course, we play in those other industries too, and we use those technologies to make our legume inoculants a little bit different in terms of value-added creations. And that will be our strategy in outside of the U.S. as well.
So let's start talking some of the products. Mm-hmm. Remind the listeners, what's the core base that you're able to provide? I mean, we're at Commodity Classic. There's all kinds of commodities represented here, but the core is corn and soybeans?
It sure is. I would say, in terms of volume of product that we produce, it would be largely soybean related. In the legume side, we'll come to corn here a little bit later, but on the legume side, we have, of course, forages like alfalfa and clover, and we provide legume inoculants in those, and then peanuts as well. And I'm sure we're sitting here in Denver, maybe a lot of people from Georgia didn't make their way up to Denver to talk peanut inoculants, but if they're here, stop by the booth, and we do have some examples of products. And that's what's been fun too, is these are crops that maybe don't get the attention that everybody does, and certainly in the legume inoculant space, there's not a lot of R&D effort into that, but we take what we learn in these other crops and bring them to these little bit more minor crops.
And when we think about sitting here at Commodity Classic, this is the premier event where we see companies like Novonesis launching new products or maybe sharing future plans for what's coming down the pipeline. What's the big news for you guys this week?
It's kind of a follow-up on what we talked about last year. So we kind of did a soft launch on a technology. So another bread and butter and mainstay with us is a molecule called LCO. Stands for lipocyto-oligosaccharide.
Can you break that down for us a little bit more?
Lipocyto-oligosaccharide. I actually can spell it, and I should be able to. I've worked with it for enough years. But it's primarily used for the communication in the legume system as nodulation, initiation, but for crops like corn or wheat, non-legume, it also acts as a stimulation and communication molecule for mycorrhization. What's different when you think, so this micro or this biological space, there's a lot of subcategories within it, and certainly you have microbial products, and we kind of, I think, the U.S. farmer is learning that we have to treat them as such. They're living organisms. Maybe stewarding them is a little bit different than a jug of chemical, right? It has to live on seed, live in the soil to do the things. So that would be microbes. And then the other side of biologicals in agriculture, you have a lot of things, and the LCO would certainly be in that camp. The advantages of that is you can mix it with products that are typically going to be deleterious to a microbe that'll kill it. This is a molecule that can't be killed. So you can mix it with things like UAN or maybe some harsher starters or ammonium thiosulfate and not worry about, are you going to retain the value of the product when you apply it in that way.
And that helps with number of passes, efficiency with labor, all of those good things too.
It's going to be tough to make specific applications with these growth enhancers, whether they're microbial, biological, or other. Because I don't know, a trip across the field probably costs most producers $8, somewhere in that range. Maybe if you're a custom app, it might be even more. So that's a heck of a lot more value that it has to provide. But if there's opportunities that go in, that typically tie on with when we're applying protection products, it works well.
I was going to ask what your application methods are. If it was a seed treatment, or you mentioned that it's going in with fertilizers, is that the typical?
It's kind of all of the above. So we have a very big footprint as a seed treatment. Certainly that's going to affect early vigor and some of the early stresses. And I don't care if you're a grower in Minnesota where I live, or you're a grower maybe down in Arkansas. If you say cold soils to a grower, they know what that means.
Yep.
And those are stresses. And tomorrow, if you swing by the booth, I invite you to swing by the booth. We actually have our R&D lab is sending some Petri dishes where we have put this molecule on seed and then germinated and grew it for a couple of days under pretty harsh conditions, whether it's saline or cold temperatures, and you can just see the differences in how they react. So you asked in terms of method of application, of course, seed treatment, but we can go into in-furrow with starter as more and more side dress nitrogen occurs via UAN. There is an opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunities to apply the product, and value is retained.
So I want to talk a little bit more about some of the ROI and the value you're providing there, because as you've mentioned, the biological space is very big. There's lots of new companies coming in all the time. One thing I think is interesting to note, though, you guys have been around for a long time, kind of before biologicals were cool, before they were really a thing. But when you get down to the brass tacks of it, if you will, how many applications, how many years does it take growers to see some sort of ROI? And what is that ROI they're typically seeing?
I think it depends on the product that they're using, of course. Certainly, again, I'll break it down to legume inoculants. When we have conditions of maybe long rotations where you haven't seen soybeans for a while, that's so visual to a grower. That's the other thing that's very nice when the biological space, a lot of these other things you can't see working. With a soybean inoculant, you can see the nodules. You can make a visual observation in season to know if the product you're using works well. And so how long does it take? It depends on what you're doing. If you're applying something like that has an effect on the crop that year, you'll see it immediately. When you're talking about maybe revitalizing a soil that might have been, lost some of its biological life through practices or maybe periods of flooding or what have you, those types of cocktails of organisms might take a little bit longer, but it all depends on the level of depletion when you started, in my opinion, right?
Yep.
Good point.
I know that's always a tricky question to ask, and I know you see billboards and advertisements that say 2 bushels to the acre or another. The guarantees are tough because every situation is unique. Mm-hmm. But I'm more excited as we get ready to wrap the conversation up as to what you're excited about for the future.
When you look at the R&D spend in this space versus when I came into this biological products in agriculture 15 years ago, we're going to find something that is truly game-changing. we've always been making attempts, but along the way, we've found some really neat, we learned a lot about the fertility practices that we employ and as we change things. So I think it's just part of that whole systematic approach. It's never one thing. You can't win the title with just one player. You need a host of supporting casts. And I think that's where we're just steadily moving the needle and getting better. I see it already.
I like that, Delaney.
Yeah, I do too.
Yep.
Great way to end the conversation, Adam. If any of our listeners tuning in want to know more, have some additional questions, where can they go to find more information?
I think thinkbiological.com. So http all the backslashes thinkbiological.com would be a great place to start.
That's good. Well, it's been a pleasure catching back up with you. Maybe we'll try to see you more often than just once a year at Commodity Classic. But again, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, swing by the booth.
It's always great to have Adam back on the podcast. But Delaney, I think our listeners want to know what's happening in the markets this week.
Certainly ahead of next week's first planting intentions and quarterly grain stocks report, we're seeing the markets react. We're starting to see those early estimates come in now. And even though the USDA forecasts predicted 94 million corn acres, some trade estimates are surpassing 95 million acres, which we'll get to here in just a second. But overall, the Farm Futures March survey indicates those projections from the USDA may be inflated. In the top 10 corn-producing states, half of respondents told Farm Futures survey they were going to reduce their corn acreage, notably in Iowa and Illinois, which together account for about 1/3 of the U.S. corn production. The survey suggests the market isn't influencing a major shift in planting decisions, but we're seeing some mixed reviews here. FBN shared their results for planting intentions this week, expecting to see corn at 90.5 million acres, soybeans at 83.5 million acres. Alclice and Successful Farming surveys pulled in similar numbers, corn at 90.6 million acres and soybeans at about 82.7, while wheat was coming in about 46.4. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, we saw agmarket.net had some pretty different numbers. They're suspecting we're going to see more corn acres due to a lack of profitability and higher break-evens this year for soybean prices. And I would have to say I'm kind of hearing the same. According to agmarket.net's report, they are estimating that we are going to see about 95.3 million acres of corn and 82.75 million acres of soybeans, and wheat about 47.82 acres, so closer in line to where USDA is at. That report, of course, will be released on March 31st at 11 a.m. Central Time and is probably going to be a big market mover. Meanwhile, soy oil prices surged higher earlier this week on news regarding the joint collaboration President Trump has instructed the oil and biofuel industries to take, creating some optimism for more soy oil demand. Corn this week also continued to remain under pressure as there were mixed acreage report numbers coming in that we talked about earlier. Soybeans, meanwhile, seem content to stick around that $10 mark in both old and new crop contracts, which for some producers might be below break even this year. So whether or not we see that really push some of those planting decisions, I think is going to be interesting to see what USDA thinks next week.
It is. And I wonder if we remember some of these predictions and see if anybody gets close. Because if there's that wide of a variety.
It is a wide range for sure.
And it's not typically that wide of a range ahead of reports.
It is. That's you're right. But USDA always seems to throw in some surprises, so I'm sure we'll get some next week on that report.
Speaking of surprises, Delaney, did you fill out a March Madness bracket?
I didn't. I kind of forgot about it, and I know. Are you still in?
What a surprise.
Yeah, well.
I did. I filled out 3 brackets. I used ChatGPT to do one, and it's the worst of all of them.
Okay, so don't take ChatGPT's.
Correct. And then I've got one that's not doing so hot, and another is in the 89th percentile.
Wow. You just wanted to brag about that.
I did. And for all you listeners that care about sports, transfer portal's open. So hopefully your college gets some new energy. We'll call it energy.
I like it. Also, big headline this week, of course, Northwest Missouri State. The coach that was there when I was there and won quite a few championships, Ben McCollum, is now going to the Iowa Hawkeyes. Yeah. Which I know you're not. I know. I was raised a Hawkeyes fan, so it's a fun connection to see that.
For you listeners, I'm not super strategic when it comes to apparel on this show, but today I wore an Iowa State shirt because I was afraid that was going to be a part of the news today. But we don't need to keep you any longer. We know you've got a busy day. We thank you so much for sticking with us. Follow us on social media. Look us up on YouTube. But what do you say for Delaney? Is it time to let him go?
Let's let him go.